I was expecting something more kind of... So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Ferguson. I head the School of Public Health here at Imperial College. We're here today to celebrate a significant milestone in any academic's career, their appointment to full professor through our inaugural lecture series, which is a kind of platform to celebrate and showcase our professors' work. I've had the privilege of working closely with Ben since my appointment a year ago. He, as well as his many talents as a researcher, he's also been co-director of our research committee, or co-chair of our research committee within the School of Public Health, and an important role in any department. He's going to tell you about many things to come in his future, but one I particularly wanted to highlight today is his recent appointment to be co-director of, well, the title is in evolution, but coming out of the new Imperial College strategy, a convergence science centre for sustainability and science around sustainability. Ben has he's been with the Environmental Research Group almost since its founding, I hear, more than 30 years ago. Initially, I think outside King's, and then in King's College London, and then a few years ago with the move to Imperial College London, he now co-directs the Environmental Research Group at Imperial College. He is, and I'm going to refer to my notes here, since I got off a plane this morning from the States and still quite tired. But I mean, really, he's an expert in the measurement and quantification and analysis of air pollution and exposures of populations and individuals to air pollution. He's worked both from a UK focus, but increasingly an international focus, which he'll tell us about in sub-Saharan Africa and China. And I think one thing both he and the Environmental Research Group do very well is engage with local communities and provide information and technology and tools for people to make decisions about their own exposures, and I'm sure he's going to tell us about that as well. Anyway, with that, I will conclude my remarks, except for saying there is no fire alarm test planned, so if you hear a fire alarm, we have to go to an assembly point back out through the entrance at the corner of Exhibition Road and Imperial College Road. I think it's unlikely to happen, just to tell you. Ben.
Thank you, Neil. Good evening, everyone. I was asked to come up with a title that summed up my career in 9 words or less, which was somewhat challenging. So I took this to the dinner table, and following a series of thoroughly unhelpful and inappropriate suggestions from my wife, my daughter then suggested, take a deep breath. There are 2 reasons why I particularly like this title. First of all, that I predicted at this point I would be probably getting quite over-emotional. So I needed to take a deep breath, which I am. And secondly, it really does sum up my career. I've spent most of that trying to answer the question when people ask me, should I take a deep breath? Should I take a breath here or now? And I'm going to really develop that theme as we go through the lecture today. But let's start with big data. So, the Health Effects Institute in the US funded recently 3 very, very large epidemiological studies, one in Canada, one in the USA, and one in Europe. And this is really a reflection of how far air pollution science has come in the last few decades. These were huge studies using administrative data sets of millions of people. Overall, across the 3 studies, 100 million people. And these take the administrative records around disease and death and relate them to air pollution exposure. And what all 3 of them found with remarkable consistency was as PM2.5, this particulate form of air pollution, increases, so does the risk of death. There's a few things to point out here. One is that they're quite similar, not between the three different continents, but also there's no safe level. There's no point at which we can say air pollution is safe enough, it's clean enough, it's no more health impacts. And this is a really important message. There is at no point we can say our job is done. But the other thing I really want to highlight is what you do with this evidence. Now, first of all, you don't just take the evidence and expect it to have an impact. You need people like Barbara, who's been pushing through this evidence and helping the member states of the EU take it through to new air quality directives and having an impact. Parallel, experts in the USA going through the same process with the US data. But you also need to remember, behind these curves are people. There's 100 million people in those curves. Each one of them have had an effect of air pollution in their lives to some degree or another. And some of those are well outside of these interquartile ranges, way above the Rhine. The exposure impacts on those individuals would be far more than others. And that's where I want to focus next. Ellie Kissy-Debrah is one such outlier. She was someone who was particularly vulnerable to air pollution. And this is a quote from her mother, Rosamond: "Happy, playful child growing up in southeast London with a lust for life. A few weeks after her 9th birthday, she suffered a fatal asthma attack. She's the first person in the world..." Sorry, I told you I'd get over emotional. That will happen again. "To have air pollution listed as a cause of death on her death certificate." Now, her mother didn't leave it there. She took it further, and she managed to get to the High Court to have the coroner re-examine her case, which resulted in this air pollution being on her death certificate. And the coroner came up with 3 recommendations, which I'd like you to bear in mind. National air pollution limits currently in the UK are way above the WHO guidelines, and these should be minimums. There's low public awareness of air pollution. Greater awareness would help people reduce their exposure. And patients are not being advised of the impact on air pollution on health. And these 3 themes I'm going to repeatedly come back to over the next 3/4 of an hour. So Rosamond took the tragic death of her child to drive change, and her lived experience, backed up by the evidence seen from the scientists that I showed you before, to drive that impact in a very personal, local way. But one of the biggest headlines is the bringing forward of Ella's Law, which is currently being pushed within Parliament to bring those 3 coroners' recommendations, but lots and lots of other activities. So this really proves that when you combine scientific impact with personal stories, scientific evidence with personal stories, you can have much greater impact. So my job as an exposure scientist has sat between those two. It's working with the scientists, working with the individuals to really see how we can generate impact and create change. From Beijing through to Gambia, I've worked with clinicians, I've worked with epidemiologists, I've worked with community workers, I've worked with advocates, all helping them produce the evidence and present it in a way that will have impact. And this is a wonderful career. It's one I thoroughly recommend. Now, when someone asks you over WhatsApp, "Dan, could you send me that photo of you standing in a bucket?" Most people would say, "Why?" but not my brother. How did it get that I started off as a meteorologist and now an exposure scientist? So I'd like to say that I had always wanted to be a meteorologist, but as I say, this is actually my brother standing in a bucket, not me, because I'm not stupid enough to put myself as a baby on the screen in front of all of you, and across the internet as well, because this is... So I did start off as a meteorologist. But the 90s were a bad time to graduate from university, and I did, at the end of my meteorology degree, I did what many of my school friends did after their degrees and signed on to the dole. In those days, after 6 months of being on the dole, you're entitled to support for retraining. And I was able at that point, because times have changed, to sign up for a master's, an MSc in environmental engineering while on the dole. That doesn't happen anymore. And this worked. It got me back into work. It got me into a job. Immediately on finishing my master's program, I was interviewed for a job at the South East Institute of Public Health. Now, it's remarkable that both of the people who interviewed me are in this room and I still work with them, Sean and Gary. That's how long we've been working together, and that's what I used to look like back in the days. So this took me from meteorology to air pollution, which is kind of a natural evolution, really. You can see these things connected. But there's still a big journey to come. And in 1998, or possibly 99, Gary may have corrected me on that, with remarkable foresight, Frank Kelly took our ragtag bands of air quality technicians and modelers and put them within an academic environment. There wasn't a single PhD amongst all of us. So I've still no idea why he decided to do such a thing. But it paid off, and ERG grew and grew, and it's still got that strong foundation, still got those same staff, but our research and our impact has grown massively since that time, 98, 99. Frank then encouraged me to do a PhD amongst several other of us, which I gained in 2010, and then I gained my lectureship in 2012. And that led to the beginning of the exposure science team, and Hanbin and Diana, who are here, are early members of the exposure science team. So the first study that I was put to work on was the Oxford Street 2 study in 2012. Now this followed up a very famous study carried out by Imperial College 5 or 6 years earlier, where people were walked up and down Oxford Street for a period of time and walked around Hyde Park period of time, and their physiological state was monitored to see how the impacts of breathing the more polluted air on Oxford Street compared to the less polluted air on Hyde Park. So this follow-up study in 2012 did a similar thing with COPD patients. And this really demonstrated to me for the first time a direct link between what you breathe and your health, a direct link between the two. And I felt this was a really powerful message. My next study, coming along in 2013, was in Hong Kong, funded by the HEI again. And this was looking at vertical dispersion of air pollution. So it was kind of harkening back to my older days as an atmospheric scientist. But to carry out the monitoring, putting monitors in these flats vertically in Hong Kong, it was required me to go into the Hong Kong homes. And to get that access, I had to interact with the residents. And again, I was coming into contact with real people and also clinicians, which aren't real people, but I learned a lot from them. So this fundamentally changed how I viewed research. It brought people into it, going from the abstractness of meteorology and atmospheric science through to exposure science, which is really what exposure science is all about, interacting with people, understanding how they're exposed to environmental risks. But it also highlighted to me that people were asking me questions as I worked in their home or around them, like, where should I breathe? Where is air quality better? Where is it worse? What should I do to protect myself? And I didn't know the answers. Now, this quote, I think, is a very powerful one. When experts, us, many of you, are not self-aware of the limitations of the data they're using, the results can leave communities underserved and incorrectly stigmatized. It's a form of health injustice. And what I was feeling was that we were being unjust to our communities. We were not aware or fully aware of the limitations of our data. We were going some way down the path of being asked to answer the question, how polluted is my street? But should my asthmatic child go to school? Can I cycle in London? How do I protect my unborn child? All of these were questions that our traditional geographical methods could not answer. And then other people who said, well, it's not my problem, someone else can solve that problem. Or even, I don't believe what you're saying, or what air pollution? It's invisible, I can't see it, it's not there. So there's clearly lots of questions that our usual methods of addressing air pollution couldn't answer. And this is where I dedicated the rest of my career so far. So I needed some kit, I needed some technology. And 2015 to 2018 really showed an evolution in this technology. This is what we were using when we were doing the Oxford Street 2 study. You take a student, any student will do, you give them a backpack full of monitoring equipment. If they really insist, they carry their own equipment with it. And then they walk up and down Oxford Street or Hyde Park with their patients accompanying them. This is bulky, It's one piece of kit, but it worked. It really told us what we needed to do. But for my next study, I was really determined to take that to a larger scale, put our monitors and our data into real-world scenarios. That was an MRC study called COPE, and it really changed the way that we could carry out these kind of studies. And that's because we found ourselves with a study, a successful grant application, and no technology to do it. So we developed the PAM, and Rod Jones in Cambridge and Jenny and I put our heads together and came up with this technological solution for monitoring air quality of COPD patients that they would be able to carry around for long periods of time. Now, in a masterstroke, Rod managed to design an instrument that came with probably one of the best UK exposure scientists in the UK. Now, that is timing, Leah. You could have missed that. Just 10 seconds later, you would have missed that. So, yeah, Rod and Leah have just walked in. Sorry for drawing attention of the entire audience to you as you walked in. So we now have the technology to give to people to carry around. And this allowed us to do all sorts of additional things very successfully in London and then taking it to Beijing. But we needed something a little more portable that we could give to children, we could give to pregnant women. So I started working with Dyson, with Fred, to design a backpack that kids could wear, put their school stuff in as they go, carry to and from school. And this backpack traveled the world doing all sorts of studies, generating evidence. And that's where I'm going next. Evidence. What have we found? What has all of this effort led to? So these are just a few examples that I think I'd like to highlight that really make associations between what we breathe and the health outcomes. First of all, from the COPE study, we demonstrated that COPD patients were particularly vulnerable to a particular kind of air pollution, nitrogen dioxide, not particulate matter that we had previously thought. So, and this led to an increased risk of them having an exacerbation of their condition. Analyzing that more closely, we found that nitrogen dioxide from sources of pollution indoors, like gas cookers, gas fires, was slightly more toxic to them than NO2, nitrogen dioxide, coming from outdoor, from traffic pollution. And so this really highlighted that you can't assume that pollution sources in the home are less toxic than sources outside of the home. We found that children in sub-Saharan Africa traveling to and from school and in their home environment had very different exposures between these 6 different cities that we studied in 6 different countries. And we found that higher exposures, whether that was at home or at school or traveling between the two, were associated with worse lung health in those students, and many of them were undiagnosed. Similarly, pregnant women in towns in sub-Saharan Africa are exposed to similar amounts of pollution, whether they were indoors in their home, cooking with biomass, etc., or whether they're outdoors. And this really challenged the usual study design of these kind of studies in sub-Saharan Africa, which is just to place a monitor inside the home. We've demonstrated that it's actually underplaying their exposure because they're exposed outside of the home as they go about their daily lives as well. And hopefully this will lead to further health evidence as well. Sorry, I'm behind myself. And finally, we found that children traveling to and from school, that the way they traveled, the mode of transport and the routes that they traveled made a big influence on the quality of the air that they were breathing. So that was the headline of that study, but I really want to highlight something else that came out of this study unexpectedly. We got 100 of these backpacks, and they're down here at the front. I don't think this one went to Africa because it's far too clean and neat. But all the kids were given these Element Air Quality Scientist bags. And what it really highlighted to us that our traditional geographic approach, where we model the home address of an individual and say this is their exposure, and this is the black line that you see across here, really hides a huge amount of heterogeneity. So this was, in this case, this chart, this is 50 children who go to the same school, live in the same part of London, but they travel to and from school different routes, and their homes are different. So by assigning this level of exposure to all 50 individuals, we're missing out on all of that detail. Some are good, some had very low exposures, some are bad. And this really gives us something to work with, something to get in teeth into. We need to understand why this particular child has got very high exposure and this particular child has got very low exposure. What can we do to bring the yellow line down to the green line? Most of this heterogeneity happened while they're at home. And I'm going to talk further about the well home study a little bit later on. Now, I feel that I've spoken for long enough. So I decided very foolishly to add a little experiment into this presentation to break things up a little bit. And it's caused me a great deal of stress, but I have high expectations that it's going to work. Sutong is helping me over there. And I'm going to need 3 volunteers from the audience to make my points. Anyone other than my sister? Sarah, please. 2 others, please. That's an unwilling. Yep. Either of you 2 will be fine. And Rod, come on then. Excellent. If you could come behind the sinister black curtain, please. Don't describe what you're looking at. What our 3 young, willing volunteers are going to do is produce some pollution. Now, your job is to guess what pollution they are producing. There are 3 boxes behind the screen that you can't see, and in each box is an air pollution monitor, which will give readings of air pollution, and I'm going to ask you to use those readings to predict what kind of pollution it is. So, let's see, I will give that on to you, Sarah. In fact, why don't you just stay in that order? If you could step forward and take hold of your pollution-making instrument. I've got a little bit of music here because I don't want you to be able to hear what they're doing. The first instrument I'm going to use is this one. Now, this is a little bit aged, but it's an extremely expensive nanoparticle counter. So this is going to tell you how many particles are coming out of what they're doing. You shouldn't do, but do. Yeah, go for it. So, not quite yet, please. And I hope no one heard that. Right, first form of pollution, please. Currently, the monitor is recording around 5,000. Go on then, make the pollution, Sarah. What are you doing? I can't tell you what you're supposed to be doing because everyone will know what it is.
What's supposed to do with that? Oh, yeah.
We might have to come back to you later. Oh, it's doing its... Oh, there is 18,000, sorry. So it's jumped from 5,000 to 18,000, eventually. We're going to come to you last. Rod, if you could make your pollution, I trust you know what you're doing. Well, that's quite an unconventional way of doing it, but it'll work. Yeah, thank you for whistling. So we've gone up to 10,000, 8,000. Maybe give it a little blow. 22,000. 41,000, whatever he's doing, it's making more pollution than my sister. 30,000, good. So we're looking about twice as much as the first one. If you could go for it. I'm just going to take it over here so I can drop back down again. Back down to 6,000. Strictly speaking, I'm supposed to be doing that anyway. The music stopped. Thank you. That's not music, Rod. Thank you. Right, we're back. So down to 7,000, 4,000, 42,000, 97,000, 364,000. I think we better stop there. Leave it for a moment. Keep going, please. And you, Sarah, keep going. You can actually use your hands if you want. So that's that monitor. So we've got, in rank order, we've got this one, then about twice as much in this one, and about 5 times as much as this one. Would anyone like to guess what the sources of pollution are? Shout out.
God's aftershave.
No one wants to guess. Anyone else? Yep. Okay. Okay, so none of you know. That's the message I'm taking from you. Your lack of responses tells me that none of you know what's going on. Is that why you're not talking? I know what's going on, Queenie. But fortunately, we have another monitor. Now, this other monitor does more than one pollutant. The point I want to make is when you've only got one pollutant, it can be quite hard to tell what the source is. You know that this one is producing more than this one, but you don't necessarily know what the profile is. Now, Sutong, if you could pull up some results for us. So this is the first monitor, which is Sarah's. Now, what we got here is 2 traces. The orange line is particulates, and the blue line is VOCs. So you've got a spike in PM and you've got a spike in VOCs. If anyone wants to guess now what it is. We've had hairspray. No? Orange. Okay, maybe. Now we'll go to the second pollution monitor, which is rods. So this time we've got PM going up in orange. We've got CO not really moving very much at all. The blue is CO this time, not VOCs. So we've got PM, but no carbon monoxide. Your guess is what that might be, or the nature of what it might be. Come on, there's at least 20 air quality people in the room. Sorry? Granted, an orange will not give off carbon monoxide. You're absolutely right. Any more educated guesses? Yeah. Shoe, that's an interesting one, yeah. So brushing a shoe because? Dust. Good, heading in the right direction. Now, the third one. Oh, for God's sake. No, it's not. Can you refresh it again? Just in the hope the experiment works. That's quite remarkable. So we got no pollution at all. Would anyone like to guess what's in the box with no pollution? Remember, this went up to 400,000 when we used this monitor. A candle. Yes, it is a candle. Would you all like to display your pollution sources, please? Sandpaper and wood. Indeed, a candle. Keep the lid off, please. I don't want the fire alarms to go off. Thank you. And indeed, an orange. So if this experiment had worked, then yes, you're absolutely right. We've got a form of abrasion particles, which don't produce gases, they just produce particles. No signal from VOCs, no signal from carbon monoxide, other gaseous pollutants. We've got a candle, which gives off combustion gases and particles. So we should have had a spike in PM, and I predict in a few minutes that's going to go crazy. We should have had PM and carbon monoxide, because carbon monoxide is a source of combustion. And we've got an orange, which produced particles, but they're liquid droplets, and they also produce VOCs. So by looking at the different proportions of these different pollutants, we can get to the source of the pollution. And that means we can tell people where their pollution is coming from, and then we can tell them what to do about it. Thank you very much. One second, please. I have a little something for you for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you very much to my... So I need to speed up a bit because science is a time-consuming thing. Right. Back to the slides again. A few years ago, a visiting academic from the Netherlands and I did a study where we looked at media coverage of air pollution. And this goes back from 1997 to 2017, so a 10-year-long time series of articles in the main newspapers in the UK which mentioned air pollution and other key words. And this is the time series over that period. Now, over this time period, there were lots and lots of significant air quality events. There was Dieselgate, there was Client Earth taking the UK Parliament to court for breach of air quality standards, Heathrow expansion. So there are lots of reasons for these spikes, and I should point out that members of ERG and members of this audience are probably related to 75% of these spikes. We spent a lot of time talking to the media, in front of the camera, talking to journalists, providing evidence, providing data from the London Air Quality Network, which really backed up a lot of these stories. But there's two particular I want to highlight. My second favourite newspaper headline of all time, which really, oh, sorry, I can see why you're not impressed. My second favourite article of all time. Boris Johnson cast doubt on the evidence that we were producing at King's College, followed 4 months later by my favourite newspaper headline of all time. So if you notice that these headlines occur, this curve is going up. And the way Annalene put it in a much more educated way than I can is upward spirals characterized by thresholds and a gradually increasing level of interest. So this really shows how awareness of air pollution changed over this 10-year period. And actually, it changed the political landscape as well, because these spikes really had got to a point where it was increasing and there was a maintained high level of awareness and concern about air pollution. So this led to a change in the political landscape. Sadiq Khan came in, and Sadiq made a headline of one of his election promises to combat air pollution. And he introduced a series of bold measures within London which have led to an improvement in air quality. But as those measures have become more widespread, they've begun to impinge on people's lives. And as people's lives are directly impinged upon rather than indirectly, then they start to take exception. Now, I never imagined that I would see headlines where people were saying, stop the toxic air, principally because I didn't think people cared about air pollution enough to make signs like that. But they do now, and they protest against it. Why are they doing this? And this is because our methods of engaging with the public haven't evolved in the same way that our awareness raising. We were extremely effective at raising awareness, but now we move to beyond that. It's not just awareness raising. We need to win their hearts and their minds, and that requires a different form of engagement with them. And exposure science is particularly well suited for that. So back in 2014, Diana and I set up the first iteration of Breathe London. And its aim here was to give the public some agency in air quality, make it a bit more personal to them in their daily lives, increasing their awareness and their perception of government interventions. So to that point, the public perceived that air pollution was something that was out of their control. London's air quality was bad. Everyone was breathing the same air. And this made it impersonal. It made them feel that they were powerless. But actually, in reality, as I've shown, everyone breathes different levels of pollution. So this Breathe London iteration worked with communities, COPD recovery clinics, University of the Third Age, etc., and gave them monitors and let them discover themselves about air pollution and how much they breathe as they went about their lives, and fed that back to them and looked at the impact of that. So they found the story much more personal to their everyday lives, and this gained a lot more traction. The second iteration of Breathe London came along a few years later, And this utilised the backpacks that I showed earlier and the badges. And this speaks to not only engaging the public, but educating them about the issue in a way that's relevant to their lives and empowering them to do something about it. In this case, we're looking at the travel journeys of school children to and from school. So give them a backpack, let them carry it and their classmates carry it. It's their streets, it's their school. It's much more relevant to their lives. It ceases to become this sort of abstract thing that is someone else's problem, but very relevant to them. And the parents see this and they realize it's affecting their children. So you get much more engagement, much more buy-in to the issue. And furthermore, we can give advice. This is what your child is exposed to. This is what they can do to reduce their exposure. That in itself won't solve the air pollution problem, but it will bring them into the debate and hopefully drive change itself. We also found that the children were educating their parents. So they won't listen to us. They won't listen to the authorities, local authorities or the mayor, but they will listen to their own children to change their behaviour. If you think this is sounding a little bit fluffy, look at the impact that level of engagement had and that evidence had. A 30% change in the way they commute to and from school is a huge change, given that a lot of these children were doing the right thing already. They were already walking to school along back streets. So that's actually a big proportion of children changing their behaviour as a result of this. So it is a serious intervention. It is a method of reducing exposure and changing behaviours. Now, recall these two charts I showed earlier on. Pregnant women and asthmatic children, both in sub-Saharan Africa, but really what I want to highlight is these outliers, these yellow dots. These are individuals who've got very high exposure to air pollution, exceptionally high exposure to air pollution. And this experiment has showed you we can use these data to highlight where that pollution is coming from and give them personalised advice on how they can reduce their exposure. And actually the two clinics just starting up at the moment, one at Queen Mary, an asthma clinic, an environmental air pollution clinic for children, which gives children pollution monitors who are asthmatic, looks at the results and gives them personalised advice. And Rachel and I are just starting with Yichin and Emily Mobile Air, which is the same kind of thing, but with pregnant women. And the idea is to look at their everyday lives, look at where they're exposed to pollution during their pregnancy, give them advice to change their behaviour in exactly the same way that they're given infographics about nutrition and drinking, etc. So imagine one of these infographics, but about air pollution during that period of particular vulnerability. I mentioned indoor spaces and how important they are, but these present quite a challenge. I think this is really high priority, but to engage with people within their own homes, you need a different level of integration with the community. You really need to co-design studies. You can't go barging into their homes and demand things. You have to talk to them and ask them, how would you like to be part of this study, etc. So we've started up with the Wellhome study within the last couple of years to really learn about how we engage with communities for them to allow us into their homes. Understand what their exposure is within their homes, from candles, from oranges, from gas burning, from cooking, etc. What the impact of opening and closing their windows, whether there's differences between bedroom, living room, kitchen, etc., and ventilation. Really observing their home environment to then relate this to their behaviours and their home and give advice on how we can make healthier homes, including mould, heat, stress, coal, overheating, underheating, etc. And this actionable advice will be the next step of Wellhome once we've gathered that evidence. And really, this involved a huge amount of engagement with the communities, including dinners, events in the community, and importantly, feeding back to the participants themselves about their own home, the results for their own studies. And I'm delighted and think it's well-deserved that the community team, these are, other than Diana in the middle, these are ambassadors from the local community which Imperial College employs to be ambassadors for the study, go out into the community, talk about the research, talk about the study with their own neighbours and really be the front end of the research. And they won this year the President's Award for Community Engagement, which, like I say, is extremely well deserved. Now, I've used this before. I think it's really important. I think healthy homes and environments are really of top importance. We've looked at air pollution for many, many years. I've made a career out of going particularly to polluted places, which was a foolish career move, admittedly. But I think it's shameful that some of the worst, most unhealthy homes that I have been into in formal housing, as opposed to informal, is on our doorstep in London. And this is a letter that Munira wrote to the local council about the condition of one of the homes that she found when we were going in and doing this well home research. And that really is very depressing reading. And to me, this makes homes a really understudied area where we know the solution, make a top priority of these. And this is about prevention. If a child grows up in a home like this, they will be ill. You will end up seeing them at GP clinics and not hospitals. If you clean up their environment, give them a better home to live in, then they are less likely to get ill, and you will gain that money back several-fold. And this is the kind of levels actually you get on a 6-lane trunk route in central London. In many cases, it's higher in the house than it is right next to that trunk route. Really worryingly high levels. So the second point I want to make is about decentralisation, and this has come a long way in the last few years. There's an increasing number of useful tools that we can use to inform the public about air pollution. There's apps, there's websites, there's London Air and City Air, both of which the team here in ERG create, and messages about pollution forecasts on bus stops, which we also give out to the mayor. But these are all central, and there's a certain level of distrust, not so much ownership about these methods. So we introduced a few years ago the next iteration of Breathe London, which is the community sensing network. And this is a community-led network as opposed to authority-led, where the communities themselves decide where the monitoring goes on. They have ownership of the data. We provide the backdrop, the technical advice to make sure the data is robust. They provide the inspiration and the use of those data to drive change within their own neighbourhoods. And I wanted to highlight just a couple of those that I think are really nice examples. So I'm only going to play the first little part of this video because we're a little bit short of time, but the citizen involved says it's better than me.
In 2018, we learned that the children at this school and others were breathing in illegal levels of air pollution. So a group of parents came together to take urgent action. We've used Breathe London data to do some really important things. Big leaflet campaigns, petitions, social media campaigns, and thousands of local community members wrote to their local councillors, MPs, the Mayor of London to ask for clean air for their schools and communities. Affordable, accessible tech.
I'll stop it there. I'd like to highlight this is not universities advocating. This is universities providing communities with the means of making things that they feel are important within their neighbourhood heard. And that's an important distinction between the two. And this is the kind of thing that they produce. These brilliant people have taken air pollution data from Breathe London from their node and done something that we would never have imagined of doing. 1 million data points, so this is big data. And it's knitting. Each one of these bands is the day of the year for particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide from their own node in their own housing association neighbourhood, and it's showing comparison with World Health Organization guidelines and when it exceeds guidelines within their neighbourhood. They've taken this wonderful, inspiring thing that they've created all around the world now, exhibiting it and really raising awareness of how air pollution impacts their own neighbourhood. Finally, last point about decentralisation. Now I want to end where I began, which is with Ella's coroner's 3 recommendations. First, national air pollution limits are set for high level than WHO guidelines. So we have created a new scale, and this is really going to put the cat amongst the pigeons. This top one with all the green on is the official DEFRA Air Quality Index, which is used in all of the reporting methods around the UK for reporting air quality. And most of the time, it is green. The Combined Air Quality Index integrates the World Health Organization guidelines, directly addressing this first coroner's report. And it manages to reflect in both alerts when there are high air pollution, but also exceedances of the health guidelines in one index. So it's easy to understand, but it really gives a much clearer picture of air quality than the current formal one. And you will see here, this is an aware device which uses the Combined Air Quality Index. I'm delighted to say, but not really, that we're on yellow. Now, this is not a sensor like these. These source our air pollution maps that we create at high spatial resolution. Sean and his team produce these maps at 20-meter resolution. We combine it with the monitoring data for the London Air Quality Network, run by the measurement team, and produce a nowcast for this grid cell. So outside of this building at the moment, pollution levels exceed the WHO health guideline. If you go onto any formal government site, any local authority site, it will be green. But that's hiding the point that our health is still affecting our health. If we use this green index, then we will not get traction from the public because they think everything is fine. We need to change the way we report. But also these can be placed any 20-meter point in the whole of London, giving local information. Now, this is just a prototype. It needs some development. It needs some co-design with the communities to really understand how it should be looking. But it's a step in the right direction for each three of these coroner's recommendations. So that is a somewhat whistle-stop tour of, not the first part was my career, the second part is what I feel the impact of the work we do in the exposure design team is and how we engage with the public. And it's something I'm very proud of. But what's next? Mobile Air is just starting off, and I'm looking forward to working with Rachel and the pregnant women. The next iteration of the community programs coming along. Liberty, Emily, George, Manera, finish your PhDs. But as Neil mentioned at the beginning, I think really what I hope I've shown is that you cannot solve big problems like air pollution exposure with a single discipline. You need to integrate the modelers, the atmospheric scientists, the social scientists, behavioral change, technology, engineering, to really come together to create a solution. And I'm tremendously excited about the potential of this new School of Convergent Science at Imperial around sustainability. And there's no bigger question than solving the problem of a healthy planet and a healthy population on that planet. So I'm really looking forward to working across the faculties at Imperial to really drive change in the area of sustainability. But that, as they say, is a job that starts tomorrow. So I'm going to finish just by thanking all the participants, all of the colleagues and all the collaborators in all the studies I've presented to evidence. Thank you to Emily, Alex, James, Dale, the team here setting up this event. I apologise for creating an experiment and making your life much harder. And thank you to all the participants. Thank you, ERG, and my colleagues who've supported me along the way over the many, many years, particularly Frank and Angela. Yep, Frank. I'm trying to say thank you to my family. Please, Frank, come and save me. I think we have a Q&A session next, do we? Yes. So, Hanbin, over to you. Shout.
If there are any questions from the room. Yes.
We got two roving mics.
I see one hand there and another hand there.
George, Manera, can you jump up?
The lady in the back.
Neil,
Yeah.
were you expecting?
Right, how do I check? I think it's working. Yeah, thank you. Hi. Thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. And thank you so much for bringing attention to the use of wearables for measuring level of pollution exposure with the backpacks. But that level of precision is not something that we're usually capable of achieving in most of the studies that I did through my studies. So what would you think are some variables that could be used to make perhaps household or home postcode level exposures more valid? Could it be something about their environment? Could it be something about their socioeconomic status? What are some things that we can use to make those measurements more informative?
So it's a good question. It's a big question. We can't possibly give wearable monitors to everybody for the rest of their lives. So this is a challenge. We've done several studies that are quite complex to explain, trying to overlap with our personal measurements and models and epidemiological studies of different means of exposure. So some of this is well understood, and Sean and his team are taking on the challenge that you've described. How can we model exposures at a household level, not just outside of the home, but also indoors? Some aspects are well understood. The outdoor environment is pretty well covered. We can model accurately and at high temporal and spatial resolution. Within the home, it's much more difficult, and we've got much less data. We need a lot more data, I think it's fair to say. And once we have that data, we need to look for patterns. Is it the age of the building? Is it the type of cooker? Is it the window opening? Something we're really seeing from Well Home is the use of incense and other combustion products inside the home, producing very high levels. Every home is different. And if they were truly different, we would be sunk, but they're not. We're beginning to see patterns emerging. And it is a mixture of the physical state of the home and the behavioural state of the residents within. Well Home is hopefully going to answer some of those questions, make them more obvious so that we can feed this back to the communities themselves, but we can also feed it on to the authorities to try and improve those homes, but also the modelers to be able to produce a wider estimation.
When it goes green, yellow, red, whatever, how is that defined? How does the WHO define what is healthy? What is that actually related to? And a second question was, you focused on the things that produce the pollution, but what about devices that might reduce pollution? Are they actually effective?
Yeah, okay, you can talk to Barbara afterwards. She knows it absolutely inside out. But basically, the first slide showed the large epidemiological evidence is one of the main means that WHO sets the guidelines. So they go through a full review process of academic evidence and comes to a conclusion which is a balance, correct me if I'm wrong, a balance between risk and health impacts and exposure. So as I showed, there is no safe level. So in theory, you can keep having benefits, but the WHO takes a practical approach to setting those health guidelines. It's not to say there are no health impacts below the WHO guidelines, but it is based on scientific evidence. And note that they give the guidelines. They don't tell you what you need to do to meet those guidelines. So in terms of pollution reduction, there is some potential here, but we need to be very careful with unintended consequences and inequities. Unintended consequences could be technology which produces a different pollutant than the one it's scrubbing out, and we've seen this with some air purifiers. With inequities, you've got to make sure that it's not a solution that only those who can afford it can benefit from, or can afford the electricity to run the device. You also have a potential for people entrusting their lives on the device, which is a dangerous thing, because they break, they stop working, they might not even realise. So I think there is a somewhat of a role for the cleaning devices, but I don't think they should be the priority. I think they should only be used when there is really no other option. George? Sorry. Yeah.
Hello. I'm a biologist. Just thought I'd let you know. So years ago, obviously, lots of people smoked. We know that was really, really bad for them. People started vaping. This seemed like the answer. And then we found out that vaping is also pretty bad for you. Air fryers. So air fryers use less fat, in terms of cardiovascular disease, it's our biggest killer. you know, but I suspect it gives off a lot of pollutants. Well, how do you and going back to candles and incense and stress levels, obviously reducing your stress levels is really important for certain diseases. How do you weigh that up? It may be very bad for you because it's polluting, but it may be good for you in another way. How do you weigh up those health benefits? And yeah, air fryers, I suspect they're pretty bad. But yeah, how do you weigh that up and measure that? Because there's so many variables.
It's the first time
Sorry.
my sister's ever asked me a question like that.
Ah, yes!
I preferred the old kind of question, Sarah. Lots of things I could go for here. So first of all, the epidemiological evidence. So if you've got sufficient evidence to relate a health outcome to a stressor, whether that's air pollution, temperature, all sorts of other things, and you find an association between the two, then that addresses all of those confounding factors. You say, this has an association with this. It doesn't tell you why or how, it just says statistically robustly that there is. And there's several people in the room who have made careers out of that in one way or another. Then you've got toxicology. So just because you're producing a pollution from an orange or a candle, that's not to say the same amount of pollution from each of those sources is just as toxic to your body. And the classic example is smoking. We know smoking is particularly toxic. So we need to understand these different sources, the relative toxicity of each. And when you've got a new source, like vaping or air frying, there's a whole load of research that needs to be done before you can be confident. And it took decades with smoking. So vaping research is developing, and there's increasing evidence that, for example, it may be the flavors that are in the smoke, in the vape, not the actual vape substance it says that is toxic. Air fryers, I don't know. I'm sure someone's looking at it, but I'm not doing it myself. Finally, there's a precautionary approach. If you're producing pollution and you don't know how toxic it is, the precautionary approach is to either not produce that pollution or get rid of it as quickly as possible. And that's where ventilation comes in. So my advice, if you're asking about an air fryer, would be to ventilate your kitchen as you are using an air fryer in the same way that you would as if you were using your cooker. So those pollutants that are produced by the air fryer are ventilated to the outside world and not trapped inside your home. So I don't think we should wait for the evidence necessarily. I think there are things that we can recommend to reduce the potential health impact while we generate the evidence. Now, one more point I want to make, because you were talking about well-being. I strongly believe that we should not looking at the home environment in isolation of air pollution. I think if we go into a home and only monitor the air pollution and the health, then we're not only underserving those residents, but we're also at risk of unintended consequences or not robust conclusions, which is why I talk about a healthy home environment. A healthy home environment takes all of these different things into effect, including light, heat, bioaerosols, mold, air pollution, etc., and says, is this home healthy? And one of those factors is it comfortable? Is it a nice place to live? Is it somewhere you can relax and have a better level of well-being? So we need to produce homes that produce a healthier, happier population, not just homes that are less polluted with air pollution. Is that all right?
Thank you. Shall I get rid of my candles?
Yes, yes, please.
That's actually leads on to my question really well. My question has two parts. I was curious when you were talking about air purifiers and that we're not really sure how beneficial they are. I've seen a lot in media about houseplants and having houseplants in your home. Is there any research on how much they can mitigate the in-home pollution? And then also about candles, it's really trendy now to use diffusers instead of candles or things like that. Supposedly, they're less toxic and polluting. And I wondered if you could talk about that, whether that's true or not.
So, one bit of background. The UK and many countries around the world have had established air quality monitoring networks for the outdoor world for decades. There is no indoor air quality monitoring network. This is something we're campaigning for. So a lot of these questions that you're asking, I still don't know the answer. Going back to that slide where of all those questions, we've made progress in some areas, but there's still others, particularly where there are new technologies coming along. So, other than the ventilation advice, diffusers, I would expect so. They're not combustion devices. They won't have the combustion products that come off that. It depends, again, what the fragrance is made of, what kind of chemicals is coming off it. We have the means to monitor all of those chemicals in very, very great detail. What we don't have is the means to understand whether those particular chemicals are toxic to health or not. So that's something we're working on. In terms of air purifier, there is an increasing amount of research, which if you have a controlled experiment of a controlled space and people living in that space and you look at their physiology, in case crossover trials, it shows benefits to their health. So yes, there is an argument which says air purifiers should be used, but I refer to my earlier point, which is purification and cleanup is not a solution. It's a workaround. Was that everything?
What do you think of houseplants?
Oh, houseplants. Thank you. That's the other thing. Right. A not entirely successful experiment, which shows that air pollution can mean lots of different things and have different characteristics. And different means of technology will clean up different components of air pollution. So most air purifiers only work on particulates. They won't touch the gases. Houseplants probably will affect some specific components of air pollution, but only specific ones. They don't clean up air pollution in its whole. So yeah, and then you're back to well-being. It's good for you having plants around, but don't depend on house plants to solve your frying bacon in the morning.
Great. Thanks for the excellent questions and answers. We have to wrap up the Q&A here, but we'll carry on your questions at the reception session. Now I'd like to hand it over to Frank.
So good evening, everyone. My name's Frank Kelly, and I've had the privilege of knowing Ben for 32 years now, and I guess that's the reason I'm standing here before you. So first of all, Ben, many congratulations. What a fantastic inaugural lecture. You had the science explained in a very simple, meaningful way. You've demonstrated that what you've done with your life is impactful and it's been useful. And, you know, as a scientist, what else can we ask for? And I think you've entertained as well. So I think we've all had a great time. So let's put our hands together one more time. So just a few details about Ben. Ben and I first met at St. Thomas's Hospital. We were both working there in slightly different areas. I was interested in respiratory health. Ben, as you know, he was an air quality analyst at the time. I'm a great believer in serendipity because it brought him and some of his colleagues together with me and my group. And we haven't looked back since, as you've heard. Very soon after we got together, not physically, but you know, in the same area, we started talking about further degree work for a number of people, including Ben. And this was a really big decision for him at the time and other people, because he had a full-time job, but yet he was registering for a part-time PhD. And a full-time PhD, doing a PhD full-time is a challenge in itself, but doing it while you're doing a day job is also an enormous challenge. So he started in 2003, registered at King's, and he came out the other end at 2010, which sounds long, but actually is really quite impressive. And the work that he managed to do, some of which you heard about tonight, really set him on the track of where he's been working ever since. So it was the right decision, Ben. It took a little bit longer than maybe you hoped, but in the end, you got your PhD. 2 years later, he got a lectureship at King's. 5 years after that, I think he got a senior lectureship. And it was a unique lectureship at King's at the time because it was joint. It was between two faculties, between the Faculty of Life Sciences and Medicine and Social Sciences and Public policy. And it was in the public policy arena, there was a China Institute, and Ben took over responsibility of looking after a lot of the postgrad students there. And that really, I think, reminds me to remind you of what a wonderful personality he has. Because I think his adaptability, his work ethic, and his just persona has allowed him to move through various fields in his time as being an academic. And I think that's why he's ended up being, one of our co-directors of the new Convergent Centre in Sustainability. So your career hasn't stopped here, Ben. You, I'm sure, will go on to even greater things. Let's hope that you manage to keep the research up as well, because I think there's, as you've pointed out, there's still loads to do. But I'd like to finish by just saying, behind every great professor, there's a great team, and he emotionally pointed to you today, and I think he really appreciates the support he's had. So once again, thank you all for coming, everybody in the room and those of you online, and we have some refreshments outside if you have time to stay around for another half hour or so, and I'm sure if you want to ask Ben anything else which has come to mind in the meantime, he'll be very happy to
Can I add
answer
two
it.
things?
Yeah.
One, now I've recovered. Thank you for those, particularly for those of you who have travelled a long way, Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, and thank you to my family. But finally, Sutong, can you pull the experiment up again, please? I really want to see some carbon monoxide off that candle. No. Oh. Sorry. Okay, never mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Interruption over.